Welcome to Power Lunch Live. I'm Rhett Power, your host. It is great to be with you here on Friday in quarantine. I hope you're in quarantine. I hope you're getting to be at home and stay safe and spending some great time with your family or your significant other or whomever you're getting to spend time with. Hope you're enjoying that and making the most of it. Now, we do the program every Tuesday through Friday about 12 noonish Eastern Standard Time. Depending on the technology gods, let us get it off in time, get the program off in time. But the point of the show is to have today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, people who are doing amazing work in the world, who can help us get better at what we do. Today's guest is going to do just that. I think it's going to be a fun conversation. Now, the conversation can be interactive. The way that happens is if you participate. Get on the keyboard and ask those questions so that we can try to get to those answers. If you like the program, give it a like or share so that we can grow our audience and your network can benefit from the conversations. We are broadcasting on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Twitch, and I think I'm probably forgetting something else. Anyway, we're going to monitor those channels so we can get to your questions. Today, I've got Caroline Santiago. She's founder of Utopia Life Consulting in San Diego, which is a consulting firm, a consultancy specializing in equipping leaders and organizations to achieve and accelerate growth, high performance growth, and change and transformation. Before Utopia, Caroline held leadership positions at Accenture, KPMG, Bearing Point, and Deloitte. And she is a friend and colleague in MG 100, Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches Program Fellowship. Caroline, happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Thanks, Rhett, for allowing me to join you today.
Well, it's a real pleasure. So we are in sort of these crazy times. How are you doing, and how are you staying healthy and sane? And if you are, if that's even possible.
I think that I face all the challenges that every other human being on this planet faces right now in terms of thinking about your own mortality, having to deal with homeschool at school, and then still trying to maintain business productivity and engagement and hopefully revenue generation, right? So all these tasks are at the forefront of my mind. And because of coronavirus and the impact that it has to everybody's health and well-being, every person is impacted and probably thinking about similar issues as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's sort of forefront on everybody's mind. And, you and I were talking about that the other day about how that's going to be a huge conversation in the next couple of weeks as people and as businesses say, well, it's time to go back to work, right? And so I think I want to get into that a little bit in a few minutes. You do a lot of work in change management, and I mean that that for you, that is something that you're really good at and really have done a lot of. What do leaders need to be thinking about going forward as we reopen the economy? I mean, this is we don't know how this is going to change us. We know it's going to change us. Right. I don't know that we all know exactly how business is going to change and how that's going to change our organizations, but I know it will. I mean, what do you think leaders should be thinking about right now in that way?
So again, like I said, this is a very unique situation. In my experience with change management, usually in organizations, I come and help you do a culture change or a tech adoption. So you're literally implementing systems and or processes to make the organization better, to get higher productivity, to generate more revenue, add more value to its shareholders. In this particular case, I think a nuance that's very different in dealing with all the change is in terms of, most people at the forefront of their mind that I just talked about is it's basically about survival. Everybody's in a mentality about, because it impacts every single person on this planet and their health and well-being, on the forefront of everybody's mind, quite distracting, is their survival, their health, their well-being. Am I going to get sick? How can this impact the people that I'm self-isolating with, like in my household, my family? What can I do to prevent it? What measures or organizations going to provide for me to keep me healthy and safe? if they do decide to bring me back to the workforce. So it's really interesting. And I think I want to preface this with, because this is crisis mode, I actually worked with two of the national insurance carriers in the United States, and I helped them with their digital transformations. What's really interesting and unique is most organizations have never dealt with crisis or disaster recovery. And this is kind of the thought leadership that needs to come into place, all those different components, because it's about saving lives, right? So those particular two insurance carriers had all those implemented into place. And then, as insurance and floods, and they'd work with the government and FEMA to help organizations kind of like come back from the aftermath. They have those processes, procedures, and it was all thought through. Now, the difference is most organizations that have been thriving and or high thriving and or maintaining have never really had to think about in terms of crisis mode. Okay, generation of revenue going down, that's a whole different mindset than it is in terms of the health and well-being and the livelihood of your people and then your business. So number one, most leaders have never had to tackle that, nor have they thought through or scenario planned any of this. So now they're line of fire, right? So now they literally have to think through those processes. So there's different things that they have to think through in terms of maintaining the business continuity and health and safety and wellness of their, employees. So that alone is probably one of the biggest changes worldwide in terms of the way that we operate and do business, right? So it's a different type of mode. So one of the things that I think that because it's so real time, you as a leader have to be very aware and touch with honestly your values, because when it comes to life and survival, right, leaders lead by their values. So I'll give the example, which is a really good business case study on Admiral Captain Crozier. So I think I thought it was very fascinating. And I think that he was a really good example in terms of leadership and what's yet to come for most organizations that are going to have to face. So Captain Crozier was on the USS Theodore Roosevelt. So he was in command of over 4,800 crew members on this ship. When he first realized that there were 3 cases of corona or an impact to corona, he went and reached out to his higher ups with his normal chain of command, and that didn't work. So we had to actually infiltrate out to get the assistance that he needed, because he was thinking about the lives that he had to save and that were going to be impacted. So we can do business as normal. They weren't actually going to war, so to speak, right? Usually you have a Navy carrier, it's out there, you're going to a destination that's going to war. He's faced war, the physical act of war, but corona is, it's a bacteria. So it's, a silent war. It's a silent killer. So he had to make the call, right? Like he as a leader had to look at his value proposition and say, what do I value? What am I willing to risk to save lives, to make the decision, if it's the right or wrong decisions? There are major ramifications for that, right? Not only for you personally, and for him, as of now, he hasn't been reinstated. So it took a big personal risk to his career, right? He hasn't been reinstated as the commander of the U.S. Theodore Roosevelt. Now, in terms of the impact that he made, so 600 cases of sailors have been tested and identified to have corona, 1 death, 1 in ICU. So basically, if you do the math, potentially he has saved 4,200 lives because of his decision in terms of breaking protocol, because it's unprecedented, right? This has never happened before. So I think my point being is that leaders are not only going to be able to make decisions quickly, but they're going to be value proposition decisions, right? Because these are people's lives. It's not only about revenue generation. In the past, we've had the ability to think through and be a little bit more strategic and readjust to customers and revenue generating and the way that we offer our services. But now that it's impacting lives, that's another added layer of complexity that has to come to the forefront of your mind as a leader. And at this point, hopefully leaders are thinking through that and becoming really, really clear of what their leadership stance is and their ability to communicate, and work with the HR organizations on, those scenario playing of how we're going to do that. Another thing that comes to mind to me is So we get in change management initiatives. I work with this, the senior leaders at the top, but I also work with how do we communicate and create those policies and or those business processes in terms of dealing with senior leadership, middle manager, and then the employees, right? And then we deal with customers as well, because everything has to be customer facing. So when you're looking at, all four of those stakeholder groups, you're going to have to plan for all four of the stakeholder groups, those scenarios. So usually in my line of work, we look at like the change, we identify the change, and then we identify the impacts and the prioritization to each one of those groups. So I'd imagine if you're in HR right now, a potential way that you're looking at this scenario with the ever dooming question, are we going to send our workforce back in? Because we honestly, we don't have enough data right now, right? In terms
Right.
of containment of this virus, we don't have enough testing. Therefore, we're, in the short term to kind of coordinate and mitigate a lot of risks, the risks are high, right? So vaccine is, at the shortest, maybe 18 months, 12 months, depend on federal mandates and if they make some repercussions to make that quicker. So in the short term, organizations are really going to have to make the call in terms of, do we send our employees back to work, physical,
Right.
going physically back into the office. Now, what we do know, and now what I do know when working with the organizations that I've worked with thus far in Corona is that remote work has been an option, right? So usually in an age of digital adoption and technology. So in I've been working on this for the past 10 years, digital transformation, which is everything online, getting organizations up to speed with the greatest and most recent technologies. So just statistically, only 50% of organizations are digitally transformed. So
Really?
that statistic, yes. So that statistic
Well,
alone
that's, did you
a 10-year
just
journey.
go out, keep that train of thought, but you're absolutely right. I was seeing some numbers, and they were looking at the unemployment offices in these states, and
Yeah.
some of them were working on 40-year-old technology.
Mm.
I mean, that's incredible to me. Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt you, but
No.
that's astonishing.
So this is what the landscape that people need to understand. So when you're 50% of organizations are digitally transformed, meaning have some online presence, have the latest and greatest in technology. Everything
Wow.
is mobile phone. The applications are mobile ready, device ready, which basically is the way that our world works today. So 50%.
Yeah.
So think about this. So 50% of organizations are already there. Now, 50% are not. Now, with those 50% that are already there, they may or may not have remote work policies in place.
Right.
So if the 50%,
Or it's ad
if the,
hoc, right? A lot
yeah,
of places are kind of ad hoc, you
yeah.
know?
So 50% that have already digitally transformed and have some online presence may or may not have a remote policy in place. And to your point about working with old archaic technologies, the other 50% of the world is not even online. So that's where we're seeing like restaurants pivot, right, very quickly. So anybody that's pivoting and being agile in the economy today is like, wow, I really see the value of going online. It's for my survival now, right? Like, so they
Right.
didn't choose to adopt, now they're forced to adopt. So, one other thing that I want to say, and then we can kind of take this conversation to remote work. So, in terms of the people that have made that pivot and that they have gone there, now that, and the people that haven't, one of the big questions I think at the forefront of everybody's mind, and employees will be asking this of leaders, and hopefully thoughtful leaders running organizations are thinking about this as well. So, in terms of digital technology, if only 50% were, digitally savvy, they were the other 50% that was there were thinking, what's the reason to go online? Right? That's the reason why they're not there.
Right.
They didn't. It's not 100% everybody's online, right? So the
Right.
question is not going to be, the business casing is not going to be really, what's the reason to go online? The new question that we're all going to be asking ourselves is there any good reason to do this in person? Every single person is now going to be faced with that reality in terms of dealing with going into the office or the workplace, right? So even myself, and just think about this question: is there any good reason to do this in person? Even grocery shopping, I do everything online now because I go through that thought process. Is there a reason for me to do this online, to go to do this in person? No, I can do it online. And, and someone else, there's services that provide for that now. So that really is going to be at the forefront of everybody's mind in terms of everything that we do in terms of our decision making, as far as, the impacts of COVID-19. So with that in mind, being at the forefront of your mind and in your heart space in terms of your own survival, right? Because that's really like,
Yeah.
is there any good reason to do this in person? Like now we're business casing like the reason why we have to, do things in terms of like in physical proximity, right? So
Right.
with that being at the forefront of their mind, what we do know, and with the organizations that I have been working with, since everybody is now done remote work, we're already there. So, like you said, they may not have policies in place, but work, I would imagine, say hi, Matthew.
Yeah.
Work, I would imagine, is continuing as is, right? Like people are figuring it out.
Yeah. Figuring
So,
out.
proactive organizations, their HR departments and their tech departments are probably, if they didn't have something robust, is now robustly looking into their policies, procedures, and having the infrastructure, the technology infrastructure, to really make them robust long term, right? So hopefully they're having the planning in terms of long term. Um, so, but what I have noticed working with my clients, um, there are four main difficulties in dealing even with online, and then we can go to some strategies in terms of how can we better online. So most organizations right now are having difficulty coordinating responses across teams, business units, and geographics, right? So when we go mobile, so this is the reality of COVID-19. You have an
Hey,
open
Matthew.
workspace, and now I have my son that decides that he's going to join my work. So the reality is the difficulty in coordinating responses across teams, business units, and geographies, right? So if you didn't have the infrastructure in place, that's going to be really difficult. The challenges in terms of communicating, document sharing, doing your work, and then the two-way communication. So when you have the physical proximity within your organization, you can go and see the person in the finance department or the HR department. Now you don't have that. And then you may not know the person if you have to work with a global HR person. Now you need to hunt them down online to go and find them and attempt to do your
To answer
business.
your question, right?
Yes, to answer your question. So, in terms of all the stakeholders in your organization and who you need to do your job with, has become 10 times more difficult in an online world that didn't have that infrastructure in play. So, these
Right.
are the things that are going to, hinder workforce productivity, right? So, the other things in terms of revenue generating is, everybody's dealing with, their employees, and as it should be, the health and well-being of their safety of their employees. But now organizations, because they don't have this infrastructure, and because, everybody is not 110% there
Mhm.
as individuals, how do we adjust, quick enough to help our customers, right? Because that's revenue generating. Now we've
Right.
got to think through that whole value proposition of, us organizations getting there in terms of like remote work, producing good work, high productivity work, and then now dealing with how do we face our customers challenge. That's a lot of layers of complexity to deal with. So we have your interpersonal, yourself, you have your
Right.
organizational needs, then you have your customers needs, all having to be balanced, and then you have to have the agility to move quickly and make decisions to service all three of those stakeholder groups. And basically, the lack of agility to respond rapidly to changing situations is going to make or break organizations. And we've seen that in the restaurant, in the restaurant
Right.
business quite clearly. Unfortunately, the ones that went online have a little bit better ability to, make generate some revenue, and the other ones, they probably won't make it. And so this is what everybody's having to deal with. And so in terms of the work that I do with change management, I'm always working on, embracing the change and having the agility. I'm always coaching my leaders on their ability in any given real time, present moment time, right now leadership, I call it. Do you have the ability to make the right call and change and execute quickly.
So I had a question, and we got a question from the audience that I want to answer. Hey, Eugene, thank you for being here, man. It's great to have you. We've got a question about, Carolyn, you mentioned like being able to communicate with HR when you have those kind of questions. Are there some tools or ways, since you've worked in the digital transformation, that you can make that process better or easier?
Yeah. So I think the thing is that organizations have platforms like Slack, Microsoft, so their intranet. So you need to have the one source of truth. So organizations need to designate, okay, what are all COVID-19 policies
Okay.
in one place? And what I would recommend, I'm so sorry. What I would recommend is, Matthew, please stop. What I would recommend is, Matthew? What is that black thing? I don't know, but please stop. What I would recommend is your hands are so cold. Using the intranet site or the collaboration tool, because what happens is a lot of organizations didn't have a robust strategic communications. Why are your hands so cold? Shh, Matthew, I'm on video right now. Okay? I know, but why is your hand so cold? So inundating employees with so many emails about COVID-19 really from an organizational perspective is a nightmare from an employee perspective. So in terms of thinking about, the way that you organize your material, you look at it from, individual, like how do individual employees get impacted? Secondly, organizational information that needs to be given, policies, procedures, and then you can do it by teams, right? So if teams actually have their own, they have their own Slack collaboration sites, like even addressing any COVID-19 issues there, and then have their managers, or even as a team, any coaching that they wanted to do, or any team meetings in terms of like dealing with, these difficult conversations around your health and well-being, which in itself has generally not infiltrated the workforce, right? These are conversations that we normally, from organizational like risk mitigation, people stay away from infiltrating deeply personal issues. I mean, we have to have some of that, but because of COVID-19, that's going to be the reality in terms of being able to have really difficult conversations.
I can see, like, I think to your point, it was a great one. Put all of this in a central location. I mean, over communicate. I mean, I would have HR town halls, maybe even weekly. I would have a really robust Q&A kind of place for people. It's anytime a new question comes up, put that out there. I think actually that clarity is going to be really key, right? And because you don't want people to fill in the blanks for themselves. And I think that's a great point that you made.
Well, and the thing is, what you said too, is like, if they fill in the blank for themselves, they're already internally churning. If you don't give them the structure and guidance as an organization to know where they need to go, what they need to do, it directly impacts further workforce productivity, and then workforce productivity usually generally impacts revenue generation, right? Performance.
Right. Yeah, no, it absolutely. I mean, and I was actually going to ask you, how do you get high performance now? I mean, how do you? I mean, to me, it's a fascinating question, right? How do you, when people are worried about, as you were talking about, their health and their well-being and their life, and this has a mortality rate. This isn't just the flu or a cold, right? It's something that can put you in the hospital. How do you get high performance out of people now? And do you demand it, or how do you even say, well, we got to focus on our KPRs right now? I mean, how does that even come into the discussion right now when people are worried about so many other things?
So I think that number one, a high performance habit is clarity. So in general, every person, leaders as well for the organization, but every person individually for their own, because we have our own agency, right? We control ourselves. In order to have, high performance is being able to have our own agency and use it by getting that clarity. Again, it's around your values, like what's really important to you, right? Because we're juggling right now. There's been an emergence of there's not the business world and the personal world. As you saw my son, Matthew, please turn that down, infiltrating my life. So there is no balance. It's just me, Caroline. So I need to get clarity in terms of my values and what's important to me and play out those scenarios on, the different propositions that are placed in front of me. So the reality is, like, a lot of the workforce will be thinking that question: is there any good reason for me to to do this work in person? And a lot of organizations, they may or may not have the flexibility to say work from home. They may have their essential workers and then some other groups come in. So I think the number one step individually is to get clarity on your own value proposition of what's important to you, so when that tough decision needs to be made, you can make it. That also goes in terms with leaders, getting clarity about their values as an organization. Like, what are they valuing and how are they going to execute to that? And I think that, again, I say it, the example of Captain Crozier, every leader better put themselves in his shoes, because he is a prime example, because you will now have people's lives, their livelihoods, their health and well-being in your hands. In typical business, we didn't necessarily have that. You could still have productive workers and have, with all these less distractions, but now you have people's lives, life or death, in their hands. So you're going to have to think through that value proposition in terms of what are your values? What are your values in terms of leading? What is doing the right thing for you in your organization? And are you willing to take those risks and the ramifications that come with that risk? Right?
Well,
So it's,
his crew responded
yeah.
the way they did because he valued their life more than his career,
Mm-hmm.
right? He valued their safety and their health above all else, above the
Mm-hmm.
mission, above all. That was the most important. That became the mission, right? And so I think that that's why they reacted the way they have, and I think that's why the Navy's saying, well, we need to rethink putting him back in command. Maybe he needs to be back in command of that ship because he did the right thing.
Agreed. And
Right?
I think that's where it's a new wave of leadership, right? So COVID-19 has brought every human on the planet to think about their own mortality, and we're all facing our own humanity. So
Yeah.
organizations are now going to have to deal with, we're human, our humanity, employees are human. So again, there was a big divide before for the work-life balance. Well, under these current situations, it's survival. So it's
Well,
about your personhood and your humanity.
right. And I think that you're talking about that added equation now, and to me, it seems like if I'm deciding whether I want to work for this organization or not, right, that is now an additional question that I'm going to ask. Do they care about me in that first and foremost? If we have to shut down again, or if somebody in the organization gets sick, I know they're going to make a decision based on people and values, not money, not economics,
We
right?
would hope.
We hope, but
We would.
but the organizations that do it that way are going to be the ones that thrive. I think in this sort of new added thing that people think about now.
So I think the other thing is, it's a short term and a long term game, right? So playing out the scenario that you just said, having, anytime you try to do something to have a short term gain, is not, it's a short term game. That's the benefit. A long term game, like what you just said, having more empathy and compassion and really thinking through the risk for the health and well being of employees. In the long term, your organization may be potentially standing, and then you'll have your employees that will be able to work through and like get through these hurdles. The short term game is if you force employees to come back or you don't give them option. And the other thing that I've said to my clients is, hey, one of the things you can offer, and that's your choice in terms of your leadership, but there is an option. There's not a just you have to go to work or you don't, is you give the employee the option, right? So then they take the ownership in terms of their work productivity, in terms of managing, just like any performance review, right? You just have to
Right.
do the work at home. So you're still
Right.
going to get rated on your performance review and how you perform. But when you give that option, you're now an employee friendly organization, right? So you're
Right.
gaining mass benefits. And then the employee is now personally taking on that ownership to do the right thing and be productive, right? If that's the way it is. So in the short term and the long term, until Corona is, is figured out, that may be a win-win for both. It's just an option. And organizations that I've talked to, they're like, I didn't think about that option. And I was like, nothing has to be and or, because it can change at any given time, right? In terms of assessing the risks of the impacts of Corona. So that's where that agility comes into place, right? Making the right calls at the right time, like right now, and then readjusting to new data that's coming into play, or new impacts that are coming into play.
As you're an executive coach, and how does this change coaching, you think?
So on two levels. So number one, from an executive coaching perspective, we need more good executive coaches continuing the work that they're doing, working with those, senior leaders more now than ever. So it should be a very good thing. And on a second scale, even with remote workers, if people are really thinking through this process and if this is going to be long term, they're going to need, teams are going to need that coaching support. So from a coaching perspective, there may be great opportunity for organizations to help teams go into teams in terms of learning supporting tools, coaching tools. So the learning and development path that was on the trajectory that was outlined prior to COVID-19 may have to be readjusted for the times. So two things that I see. I think it's a really good time for the coaching industry because our skill sets are invaluable in terms of helping people navigate the change and the uncertainty. But the second time, organizations really need to value coaching and look at it as an option so that we are continuing those contracts or looking at them differently instead of holding all funding, because really sustainability wise, the organization, your manager's not equipped. I mean, some of them were not equipped during a high performing organization during normal times. That you're going to need more of that coaching and more of that psychological maneuvering from coaches to have that stability and to move the needle for high performance. So for coaching, I think that, the value proposition that we offer is very, very good. It's just the value of what organizations see. And I hope that when they pivot, they're thinking about coaches and coaching as a solution to their organizations if we go dealing with COVID-19 remotely long term.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this seems like, and I know it's one of those
things. So it's counterintuitive, to be honest with you.
Right.
It's nice to have, but it actually should be a must-have right now.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, you cut it right now, right? People are saying, well, we got to shift our budget to this or that, but it's the wrong time to shift that leadership development, that coaching budget to something else, because right now your middle management, your director and your manager level people, they need to be able to support their teams more than ever. And I think it's going to make or break some organizations, how that middle management does right now.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. So I think
and senior leadership, but
I think a lot of organizations have to think through the short term and the long term. And if you are listening to health officials, and again, I'm going to go with, Captain Crozier is the example. His, ship is, what happened to him and his ship, some of the facts in terms of that is that he did it early proactively, and there was only 3 cases. And then as they tested, a majority of them didn't even have symptoms. And so now they're just seeing the first death. So yesterday was the first death of one of the COVID-19s. So the ramification in terms of COVID, could potentially stay dormant. So you don't even know the impacts. So are organizations ready to face bringing back the workforce into the office? Do they have the policies, procedures, the healthcare equipment to sustain a potential outbreak? Then what happens? And in terms of change and transformation, you want the least amount of disruption, because change is already hard. So they've already had to working from home with adjusting to their family. So now if you reintroduce this, it's another change that they're going to have to adjust to. And then it's change in a scenario base, right? So you're working at home, you're working at work, and then you find out that someone has COVID-19. That may or may not cause panic. The organization has to deal with it, like in terms of, how are they going to do it? We're going to send everybody home again. So basically, all productivity stops again.
Yeah.
We're just trying to normalizing the remote working. So, in terms of stages for building personal commitment and dealing with any change, you start off basically with general awareness of the situation, what we're dealing with COVID-19, general understanding, personal understanding, acceptance, adoption of what people are calling, the new normal, right? If it's remote
Right.
work, and then ownership. So people can adopt remote work, but if it is not part of their being and their understanding, and they haven't got into, high thriving performance, they may not necessarily own it, and you may not capitalize on the high productivity and the performance, right? So
Right.
in all of this, to get up through the stages of change and transformation, you need to get every individual to own this new reality and the impacts of this new reality. So the quicker that people accept that, even organizations and individual, like I may not go to work or I might have to go to work, then you can actually move up the performance curve. But until you accept, adopt, and then potentially own, you're not going to have high performance, or you're going to have performance at best. And every organization is to judge that, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Every individual is different in terms of their performance.
We had another question that I actually thought was really interesting. How do you says Caroline, what techniques do you use to help people get out of their own way? Does that make sense?
Yes. So I think the thing is number one is accepting the reality. So I did this myself personally. When I talk to you about values and dealing with your own mortality, I faced the reality. I mean, this is just my thought process in terms of playing out the scenarios. If I died, thought through my will, re-looked at my will because of my son. What are all the impacts to that personally to me, like the reality? So I think the thing is like anything change and anything with COVID-19. So people really don't want to go there. So it's really, you have to face the truth, the reality of the matter, and organizations have to speak truthfully about the reality of the matter. And, anybody that knows me is I'm a very positive, optimistic person, but I think realism and pragmatism is really, really important now. So once you accept, okay, I could die, you played out the scenarios, you've taken care of like your family and like played out those scenarios, then you kind of come to a more stable place of like, okay, now that I've accepted this new reality, like what can I do? Where can I go from here? So then you focus on the real work. They say in coaching, like the first problem that someone asks is never the real problem. So
Right.
it requires us to go deeper, to be honest with you. So you may be thinking like, okay, I'm a remote worker. I may or may not have to go to work. But again, what are those implications of you going to work or not going to work? So again, it's all that crisis scenario planning that needs to happen for organizations, but you individually as a person. And what did I say is one of the key performance measures and high performance is clarity. Once you have that clarity and that acceptance, and then you get to adoption, then you take ownership and then you can move forward. Does that make sense? Because I struggled. I'm going to be completely honest. I struggled. I had emotional, I feel like for me, like an emotional meltdown myself. And I even coach, senior executives on this, but that's part of my humanity. And once I dealt and as Brene Brown says, once you state the feelings and own the elephant in the room and acknowledge it and process it and think through it, then you can come out the other side more clear and able to be less distracted. Because again,
That's it. That's it right there. That's it right there. Once you deal with it, you're not distracted. That's true.
Yeah. Everybody's thinking about, I started this conversation, said everybody is dealing with their own survival, their own mortality. Once you've dealt and accepted with whatever basis of like how you're going to deal with your mortality, then it frees up all this headspace, all this heart space to focus on the things that are in front of you and focus on the things that you can control in terms of your agency to be productive or not.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. Absolutely. That makes so much sense to me. Um, Thank you so much. This has been
You're welcome.
fantastic. We have to do this again, and you have to
Yes.
bring Matthew back on. That was awesome.
I think that is the new reality, everybody. So people are trying to shove their kid, outside and like tell them to shush. But I'm like, well, this is the new reality and I've accepted it. And clearly my son has accepted it. So thank you, everybody that was watching today that, you know,
All
accepted that
good.
my son was on this and that everybody, is working from home and this is our new reality.
And that's okay. And I
Yeah.
think it's to me, it helps us understand people a little better and um, to appreciate that we all are dealing with this and the best that we can and in our own way. And I think that's okay. I think, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No, and I'm glad that you brought that because even organizations like before, when you would do telecommuted, we'd all hush hush our kids and kind of judge and kind of, make judgments. But now, hopefully, people will be more compassionate because this is everybody's reality working from home that has
Yeah.
families. And so we would lend to be more compassionate, more empathetic, and allow it to create more connectivity and community in trying to get through COVID-19.
Amen to that. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
being
Rhett. You
here.
take care. It was
You
great
too.
talking
And
to you.
thank you for spending some time with us today here on Power Lunch. You can find the schedule at powerlunch.live. We'll be back Tuesday with a new program. You can join us this afternoon, though. I have a special call on our Courageous Friday afternoon call. You can find that on my LinkedIn profile. Today, I've got a fantastic guest, U.S. soccer star Brendan Donovan. We're going to have a great chat about soccer, about his life, and about the commitment it takes to be and play at that level. And so that's going to be a fascinating conversation. Please sign up for that. You got to get your seats now kind of thing. And so we're going to do that today at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So make sure to go onto my LinkedIn profile and sign up for that. And until next Tuesday, have a great weekend. Enjoy one another and stay safe and healthy. And Caroline, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rhett. You stay happy, healthy, and safe. Take care,
You
guys.
too. All right.